can't walk around like that.
Why not?
Because it's insane.
With the $1 billion plus that is going into Major League Soccer and youth development, that should have never happened, and it did. And
it's not working. I just hold it.
Look at this. This is just spectacular. These people are losing their mind. This is beautiful.
I've done interviews before where they make me repeat things. They're like, oh, that didn't come out well. Can you say it? So feel free to tell me to say things. Every person needs to have some self-concept clarity. We have to know who we are in life, and if we don't know who we are, it creates a lot of discomfort and discrepancy and anxiety. One reason I think why fandom is so popular is to individually create your identity. And then the second thing is it helps you to create a social circle. You know, sociality is so important for human well-being. And so having that ability to connect to other fans, I think is another huge reason why fandom is so popular.
Part of what explains the popularity of the sport lies around the social context, social conditions of its participation and consumption. The cost is one aspect, but it's also our teams attached to cities. If we think of sports, if you're a fan of the Dodgers or Angels or another local team, they're not just a team that's your favorite, they're the basis of a form of communal life. It's the same type of connection that we have to our local church or our family. There's no market dimension to it. We follow this team because it's our team.
We want to feel part of something bigger than the self, but we also want to feel unique. So we do this balancing act where we tend to try and identify most frequently with groups that provide a large enough setting where it's we're part of this collective. We're not on our own. We're embedded in this group, but within this group, I'm unique. This might be part of the difficulty of getting people to see global humanity in the sense if I just identify we're all on the same team, then who am I, right? That sense of individual identity is kind of evaporated.
Most forms of consumption that we engage in are divorced from space. We don't choose novelists, we don't choose what film to see because of what city it was produced in or it takes place in. Sports is unique in that there's a sense of locality. That's a big part of the appeal of sports, and that didn't just happen by accident. Baseball is maybe not so much today, but it has been for a long time the most popular sport in the United States. And in the 19th century, baseball was anything but a very popular sport. It was a sport exclusively played by independent barnstorming teams. They travel from town to town. They play for the amusement of people like the circus, and then they move on. And the audience enjoys the contest while it lasts, but they forget about it the moment the team leaves. There is nothing about baseball in the 19th century that would have made it inevitable that it would become a popular sport. What happened is that competition began to be organized in the form of leagues. And the organization of competition into league play, among other things, attached teams to cities, something that hadn't existed before. Without that happening, baseball, it may have survived as a cultural form, but it may have been a cultural product not unlike traveling theater, a musical group that travels from place to place. Baseball would have been here, but nobody would have thought that it was the all-consuming thing that team sports has become in the U.S. today.
I'm familiar with the idea of rituals enhancing bonds, and I think college football is like a good example of this, right? Like each college has their own like traditions, and those rituals that people go through sort of strengthen the bond, and that's important, right? Having strong connections to the teams to which you belong.
In a way, ritual is like a really potent icebreaker, right? It's like we are both fans of this team, and I don't know you at all, but like we know the same rituals, right? Like we can talk the same language in terms of what we know about the team. And it's a way to interact with strangers in a way that doesn't feel uncomfortable. In that sense, it kind of increases people's well-being to have those rituals, to create those relationships with strangers that wouldn't otherwise exist.
In terms of motivations for rituals, I think that is part of the system of order that makes life meaningful. And thus, those rituals are particularly important because they imbue the world with some sense of meaning, and thus it makes our actions more meaningful. Much of my work sort of focuses on this idea that believing that you are significant and that you've contributed something to your culture in some way provides a sense of symbolic immortality. If I do something really, really great and they build a statue in my honor, that remains long after I'm gone, and thus the awareness of your own mortality could create anxiety, but because we have these symbolic ways of creating immortality, it's less terrifying. And so in the case of sports fandom, I think the psychological benefit there is that there is like this sort of continuous narrative, at least in how we experience it, where it's the Cubs were playing before I was born and they're going to be playing after I was born, right? And, maybe my son, he's experienced more Cubs success in his 7 months of being alive than I've experienced in my entire life, but that's fine. He becomes a Cubs fan, and then when I'm gone, like that sort of bond that we had over that remains, right? And maybe he passes that on to his child, right? So you get these sort of cross-generational effects, which are appealing, I think, in a context where you're worried about immortality or whether or not people are going to remember you when you're gone. There are people who went and listened to the game by their parents' tombstones, right? Or went and had a beer at their dad's gravesite, right? Like those sorts of things are very meaningful. And that sort of connection, right, like is not doing anything psychologically for the person who's deceased, but it reinforces this idea that there is something more lasting than just our physical existence.
Dad gave up $2 for his marriage license fee. He really had no idea what an athlete he'd be. To gain his reputation, Daddy did not have to roam. We hold all our Olympic games right in our home sweet home. At indoor sports, no family can beat us. At indoor sports, they're all afraid to meet us. You don't know what you're missing. Pick the fad up right away.